The question of why Italy continued to use the Fiat County Route 42 biplane as a frontline fighter at the beginning of World War II, rather than focusing on monoplanes, is more complex than it may seem at first glance. Contrary to what one might think, other nations such as Great Britain, Germany and Russia also continued to invest in biplane fighter designs and prototypes in parallel with the development of monoplanes. The main difference was in the investments and results obtained in engine development, which allowed these nations and France to have a yield of advanced monoplanes capable of supplying the flight lines already close to the outbreak of war. I would like to point out that this does not automatically mean that they guaranteed a front line that outclassed that of the Italian Air Force, as the first clashes in the skies of France, Belgium, Great Britain and Africa demonstrated. Britain, despite initially having problems with the Kestrel engine, which was the one that powered the prototypes of both the Hurricane and the Spitfire, generating disappointing results, invested heavily in the Merlin, which initially had very serious development problems. So much as to have a very noteworthy series of accidents which cast into doubt more than once the RAF program of equipping themselves with fighters only with inline engines. In fact, at the same time, the British fighter prototypes with radial engines were ready, and furthermore, given the problems of delays in development and start of series production, and the destruction of many production lines due to German bombing, fighters were purchased from various other nations to fill the RAF flight lines. I want to point out something that is not thought about when you ask why the Merlin reached reliability and the Fiat A38 not in time, just to make a parallel. Great Britain invested about 8 times as much as Italy invested in its similar engine, the Fiat A38, and the Merlin reliability was reached a whole 8 years after its first test. Germany, for its part, after a long period of studies and investments, developed the powerful Daimler-Benz DB601. But I remember that its Messerschmitt 109 monoplane initially had the problematic Daimler-Benz 600, which in the Spanish War gave an unspeakable series of problems and low power. So much as to make the German operationally unuseful compared to the He-51 biplane that the German Condor Legion deployed in the same role. Daimler-Benz, only after a gigantic implementation of new technologies, namely direct injection, the hydraulic joint, advanced roller bearings. The 4th generation compressor made it reach the level that then allowed the successor of the DB600. i.e. the DB601 to be one of the best engines of the Second World War, and not after this latter also had a long period lasting years of reliability. At this point I could tell you about the similar odysseys faced in France, in the USA, in the USSR, in Japan on this subject. But we will talk about it later in 2025. Returning to Italy, IT encountered difficulties in developing an equally reliable and powerful engine, as was practical for anyone. Both in the field of Fiat A38 inline engines and in the Alfa Romeo 135 radial engines. Both able to provide the power and aerodynamic refinement necessary to obtain a fighter with very high performance. The investments were not sufficient to guarantee what would have been necessary to have a reliable unit already in 1940. So much that faced with these difficulties, the Italian Air Force made a pragmatic choice. To continue in the production of the an aircraft already tested and easily producible in large quantities. Was the best biplane fighter existing at the time, which was married wonderfully with the performance of the very reliable Fiat A74. At the same time, Italy acquired the license to produce the Daimler-Benz DB601, which was finally available. But its re-engineering to set up mass production in Italy took time and resources. Not only that, but when mass production parts failed to raise the number of units produced compared to what was needed. Only the following Daimler-Benz 605, produced by the Fiat production lines, managed to provide the required output for high-performance monoplanes. But by now there was an armistice with everything that happened with the dissolution of the Royal Aeronautica. The Italian Air Force needed aircraft operational quickly to supply existing groups and those in formation. Monoplanes such as the Fiat G50 and Loewe Macchi C200 were in the development phase and had problems with development, and were also suitable for experienced pilots. On the other hand, was very easy to handle, easy to fly and very forgiving of mistakes, which made it ideal for all pilots leaving flight schools and the Aeronautical Academy without limitations. It was therefore a solution to temporarily fill the flight lines. This temporarily became more and more permanent because they were also flexible in use. It is not correct to say that the pilots were in love with the biplane and did not want to switch to the monoplane. The pilots were aware that the performance of the monoplanes was superior. Excelled in thanks to its maneuverability and armament, at least initially excellent. Furthermore, was robust and adaptable to other roles, so it became fundamental for the Regia Aeronautica even in the continuation of the war. The CR.42 was a sesquiplane, which means that the upper wing was larger than the lower one, a feature that, together with the tapered shape of the wings, the reduction of the wing surface area and therefore of the induced resistance reduced the overall aerodynamic resistance and improved maneuverability compared to classic biplanes. And this was seen in a striking form when the Fiat biplane compared with a classic biplane like the Gloucester Gladiator. The cab equipped with effective 12.7 mm breeder guns. Furthermore, the triple constant speed propeller gave an advantage over previous models. I remind you that all British fighter aircraft arrived to mount such a propeller only during the war and not already in the first series. Despite the speed limitations compared to monoplanes, the successes, especially against the first models of French and British monoplanes, thanks to its maneuverability. The Belgian pilots, in particular, demonstrated what was the level of this aircraft. They faced the first days of the German invasion with duels with the Messerschmitt 109, which already mounted the Daimler-Benz 601. Demonstrating the full competitiveness of the aircraft. While a similar result was achieved when Italian pilots during the Battle of England managed to engage in combat with the Hurricane and the Spitfire, in fact dangerous, especially in close quarters and low-altitude combat. Thus, the RAF directive was issued to British pilots not to engage in maneuvered combat with the Italian fighter. The important problems faced by the pilots during the England War were other, that is, the fact of piloting in a climate not provided for by the equipment of the Royal Air Force, which were those of the expanded Mediterranean basin, and the absence of a radio. But we will see them in other videos. See you again.